It began with silence, deafening, unnatural, a void only space could conjure. Somewhere beyond the rim of Saturn's icy shadow, in 2015, astronaut Commander Elias Vega vanished. No distress signal, no telemetry, no debris. One moment tethered to the International Expanse Voyager during EVA 17, and the next, gone. Not a trace. NASA launched an exhaustive investigation spanning months, combing through hours of malfunction-free data, conducting psychological autopsies of the crew he left behind. Elias wasn't just a mission lead, he was a husband, a father, a symbol of precision under pressure. His disappearance became an echo in the cosmos, unanswered, inexplicable. Until last week, July 3, 2025, when a weather satellite orbiting Neptune picked up a narrowband signal pulsing in an unnatural rhythm, a pattern long obsolete, yet unmistakably human. Then came the impossible, a 7-second burst of audio containing a voice, fragmented, distorted, but undeniably his, 10 years lost in the dark. And now a light that shouldn't be there flickers back. For NASA, it was a shattering resurrection. The faint transmission, catalogued under anomaly, NEP 451, arrived cloaked in interference, like a whispered memory clawing its way through a storm. Analysts hunched over their terminals replayed the clip repeatedly, as if repetition could unlock truth. The voice, cracked and ragged, uttered 3 words before fizzing into static. Cold, still here. That was all. No coordinates, no explanation. Just those words. Quiet. Desperate. Haunting. The data confirmed it. Elias Vega's vocal signature matched with 98.7% confidence, a margin that startled even the skeptics. But how? How could a man presumed dead for a decade, in a vacuum that should have consumed everything of him, now cry out from the edge of Neptune's frigid orbit? Whispers spread through the mission control halls like smoke, reopening the Vega file, re-examining the mission logs, questioning everything they thought they buried under the weight of reason. A decade-old silence had just been broken by a ghost. The resurgence reignited memories that had never truly faded. In a dimly lit operations room deep beneath Johnson Space Center, Dr. Ali Kessler, lead communications analyst for the original IV-17 mission, stood still, listening to the recording for the 23rd time. Her knuckles whitened as she clutched her headset. She remembered Elias's voice vividly, not because he spoke often, but because when he did, the silence afterward always felt heavier. Hearing it again was like a fracture in time, his tone weary, as if chilled to the soul. Cold, still here. With each playback, her mind wandered to that final EVA log, routine maintenance, no anomalies detected, a clean descent along the hull, and then static. Complete blackout. What haunted her most wasn't just the voice. It was what came just before the words, buried faintly in spectrographic noise, a frequency dip consistent with proximity to an artificial structure. Not natural. Not random. Something out there may have held Elias, and perhaps still does. As the signal loop ended, Ali whispered to no one. He wasn't alone. A review of the original EVA-17 telemetry logs began under strict confidentiality, but leaks were inevitable. What surfaced in anonymous forums and encrypted back channels was chilling. The final frame captured by the suit, cam mounted on Elias's helmet. It had never been released, deemed corrupted at the time. But magnification software, run through modern AI reconstructive programs, revealed something staggering, a crescent-shaped structure lurking just beyond the starboard thrusters of the Voyager. Too symmetrical to be a dust cloud, too angular to be natural, its edges shimmered with the faint glow of ionized particles, like metal basking in solar radiation. Experts in deep space architecture theorized it was reflective enough to blend into the void, which explained how it went unnoticed. But the truth cut sharper. Someone or something had been nearby that day. As the visual integrity eroded into artifacting, a final frame flickered on screen, a tiny silhouette at the edge of the structure, drifting, not tumbling, not floating, moving with intent. No one could say if it was Elias, or if it was even human. The discovery triggered immediate, covert mobilization. A Black Ops subcommittee within NASA, dormant since the Challenger review hearings, was reactivated under the directive Phoenix Echo. High-level briefings were convened in underground chambers beneath the Ames Research Center, where agents from the DoD, NSA, and even the European Space Agency convened under one unifying question: was Elias still alive? But as they parsed through terabytes of data, a task akin to unknitting a century of threads, an even more disturbing revelation materialized. A frequency embedded in the background noise of NEP 451 matched an old Earth-based beacon protocol decommissioned in 1997. How it appeared in a transmission from the outer solar system, broadcast with quantum resonance beyond modern capacity, was unexplainable. Hidden within the low-frequency hum was a sequence of numbers, prime digits that looped every 173 seconds. Code, encrypted or desperate? The skeptics balked, the believers trembled. And beneath it all loomed a deeper tension. If this was a message, then who had taught Elias to send it? In the days that followed, Mission Reclamation Team 9 was silently greenlit, a skeleton crew of elite specialists trained in both astrophysics and exfiltration protocols. At their head was Colonel Rami O'Neill, a decorated astronaut who had once considered Elias Vega a mentor and friend. Rami had never spoken publicly about that final transmission a decade ago, the one he'd picked up just before systems cut out, a low, warbling echo that sounded almost like breath. Now, listening to this new signal, he felt the unbearable weight of unfinished stories pressing against his ribs. The team convened at an off-grid facility in the Nevada desert, where a full-scale model of the Voyager had been reconstructed based on archived blueprints. They needed to understand not just where Elias had disappeared, but what could have intercepted him. Rami traced his gloved finger along the EVA pathways, whispering to himself. He was moving away from something, not toward it. The blueprint shimmered under harsh floodlights as if resisting comprehension. Outside, the desert wind howled like static through the stars, and for the first time in 10 years, Rami let himself believe. Maybe Elias hadn't vanished. Maybe he was taken. In a classified briefing held under artificial twilight, projectors simulating Neptune's ghostly sapphire hue, a single file was projected across the war room's curved screen. It was labeled, Vega 9 Recovery Window, T-421 days. The countdown was based on orbital proximity, calculated with chilling precision to predict when the signal's origin would realign to Earth's trajectory. That gave them 13 months to prepare for something no human had ever attempted, a deep void retrieval with no guarantee anyone, anything, awaited on the other side. Dr. Kessler stared at the render of the structure from the final frame, now enhanced and rotated. It resembled nothing terrestrial, no design tradition, no functional symmetry, just curves like flowing bone and sharp protrusions like defensive barbs. It was not meant to be seen. Beside her, Rami O'Neill clenched both fists as another playback began. Elias's voice repeated, cold, still here. But this time, Kessler noticed something they'd all missed, between still and here, a fractional delay, almost like a second voice, trying to merge with his. Fainter, slower, or older. She leaned closer, her heart pounding. There may be two of him, she murmured into the dark. And this time, no one corrected her. July 9th, 2025. The narrowband signal emitted from within Neptune's magnetic veil pulsed once more. But this time, its tone shifted. Deeper, slower, a tremor beneath silence. The waveform patterns were no longer random. They formed chords, layered in mathematical resonance, echoing across harmonics in ways no terrestrial equipment was designed to interpret. It behaved less as communication and more like a summons. Specialists at JPL ran recursive audio deconstructions, peeling back layers until they uncovered what appeared to be spatial positioning data, anchored coordinates not just in space, but in time. The implications were staggering. One of the embedded timestamps correlated not with 2015 or 2025, but with 2038, a date that hadn't arrived. A whisper from a future still unwritten. Dr. Kessler's voice broke in the control room as she stared at the coordinates. "This isn't just distress," she said. "It's a warning." The room fell to silence again, pregnant, prophetic. Somewhere in the dark, Elias Vega, or what remained of him, was reaching not for rescue, but for prevention. Back at the Nevada facility, time thickened like oil. Days blurred into nights, punctuated by sleepless meetings and increasingly erratic signal shifts. In their subterranean control hub, where digital static hummed like a second heartbeat, Rami O'Neill sat alone before the signal console, replaying the latest waveform transformation, a burst that twisted into a mirrored ripple, then fractured into silence. He hardly noticed the tear that streaked across his cheek when the console lit up pulse red, real-time data. A second voice had entered the transmission. Faint, tentative. Not Elias. Higher in pitch, almost childlike, an echo formed by something mimicking human tonality, but coming apart at the seams. Then words, not synthesized, but spoken. "It watches us sleep." Rami froze, every instinct screaming. Around him, the room seemed to tighten. That single line, no context, no continuation, felt older than language itself. Across the planet, high-clearance rooms covered in shadow moved into DEFCON 2 protocol. But beneath the fear, something colder stirred. Recognition. Whatever had touched Elias Vega was no longer observing. It was preparing. The following morning brought no comfort, just a thick, unrelenting silence seeping through the facility walls like ink in water. Dr. Kessler pored over the waveform logs, her hands trembling as she examined overlapping frequencies now behaving erratically, like consciousness under strain. One signal in particular, the childlike voice, had returned overnight, distorting as if caught between dimensions. Linguistic AI. Analysis failed to parse the intonations, but pattern recognition flagged a chilling match. The phrasing resembled early Sumerian phonetics, speech not spoken in human centuries. What, or who, was imitating a child's voice through dead languages and impossible timeframes? Across the room, Rami stared at the mission board where the overlapping timeline diagrams, 2015, 2025, and the future's 2038, formed a perfect spiral. Not a straight line. A spiral curling downward, like a descent. "It's a cycle," he muttered under his breath. Or worse, a containment. From deep within Mission Reclamation's classified archive, a pre-flight psych eval of Elias Vega surfaced with a final handwritten line scrawled in red pen. Participant exhibits persistent dreams of watching eyes beyond the hull. Recommends observatory restriction. No one had taken it seriously then. Now, they weren't sure if they ever should have looked up at all. In Washington, behind the sealed walls of a subterranean hearing chamber usually reserved for existential threats, a gathering took place far from the public eye. On the docket were not only the anomalous signals and the shadow of Elias Vega's return, but also Project Kronos, a Cold War-era contingency locked away since 1974. Declassified only hours before the hearing, Kronos documented a covert program investigating temporal displacement events near gravitational anomalies. Most had been relegated to paranoid fringe science, until now. A haunting entry from 1979 detailed an intercepted cosmonaut transmission from a failed Soviet mission that cited exact coordinates matching the recent Neptune signals, and a phrase nearly identical to Elias's. Still here it waits. The implications struck like a thunderclap. This, whatever it was, had reached for humanity before, and though its motives remained shrouded, its patience had not. As the hearing concluded, one notation scribbled by the committee chairwoman lingered like ash among the transcripts. "If Elias Vega is speaking from 2038, then something else has already been listening that long." The launch window approached like a silent ultimatum. By August, the mission was officially named Dolores, Deep Orbit Low Origin Relay Extraction Subversion, disguised within budget allocations for lunar core thermal mapping. But beneath the jargon, every crew member understood their true purpose: to ride the cold breath of the solar wind to an uncharted anomaly orbiting Neptune, to search not just for Elias Vega, but for the echo that bore his name and the warnings that came with it. Final selection of the craft fell on the retrofitted Daedalus 6, chosen for its dual AI analog navigation and experimental time-dampening cocoon, a technology previously shelved due to its unpredictable quantum interference with consciousness. The volunteers, all of whom signed waivers acknowledging their likely deaths, passed one final psych eval focused more on dream response than physical readiness. Every single one of them, 9 in total, reported identical visions the night before launch: a spiral staircase descending into lightless water, and at its base, a figure waiting alone, whispering in a voice that did not belong to them. It said, "You came too early. You always do." Still, they boarded, determined. Because if Elias had lived a decade unseen, what might a century unseen have made of him? The Daedalus 6 launched at 3:11 UTC on September 2025, disappearing into the veil of twilight like a myth written in fire and vacuum. The silence afterward was deafening, mournful. As the vessel breached Mars' orbit en route to its slingshot toward Neptune, telemetry remained stable, but transient tremors in the onboard AI system began within the first 8 hours. Murmurs through the pilot feed. Subtle, almost like stray thoughts. The captain, Elizabeth Wren, a quantum navigation prodigy, reported momentary lapses in time perception. I closed my eyes and dreamt of oceans, then opened them to find 12 minutes passed without my knowing, she logged. A signal, long thought lost, reappeared in the vessel's transponder feed moments later. It wasn't from the Vega anomaly. It was from Earth. From a geolocation buried beneath ice in Antarctica, broadcasting a mirror version of Elias's voice, modified with ancient cadence. The crew exchanged tense glances. The universe, it seemed, was not a straight line, nor even a spiral. It was a hall of mirrors, and Daedalus 6 had just stepped behind the glass. The message from Antarctica was not acknowledged in any official channel, but it didn't need to be. Patterns emerged across disparate observatories worldwide, anomalous magnetic pulses synchronized to the Daedalus 6 trajectory, seismic readings beneath polar ice shifting in tandem with the vessel's velocity vector. Someone, or something, was watching both ends of the voyage. By week 4, Daedalus 6 entered the Neptune approach corridor, the region of space last traversed by Elias Vega. Visual contact confirmed the presence of the crescent structure, larger now, partially illuminated by the reflection of Neptune's methane hue, revealing new details, glyphic scarring in its hull, or possibly wounds. Then, without command, the Daedalus 6 slowed. All systems read nominal, yet propulsion stilled. Inside the ship, temperatures fell by 11 degrees in 13 seconds. Light dimmed, not due to failure, but absorption. Something vast was eclipsing them from behind. In the sudden twilight, the AI onboard stuttered, then hummed an old lullaby in an unknown dialect. Elizabeth Wren's final log entry, transmitted seconds before blackout, was only 7 words, nearly identical to those uttered by Elias a decade before, but with a final, chilling addition. Cold, still here, now stepping through. And then, silence again. The kind only space, and something older than time, can keep. The world above did not sleep. In observatories carved into mountain tops and bunkers thrumming beneath oceans, silent eyes strained against star maps disfigured by new shadows. 3 days after Daedalus 6 vanished, a ripple crossed the heliosphere, a low-frequency pulse detectable only through layered inference, like a forgotten word stirring in a dream. Around the globe, clocks faltered for a fraction of a second. Cell towers blinked. Somewhere in Japan, a retired SETI technician awoke, screaming from a forgotten marker tone he'd once logged and discarded in 1982, now screaming with shape and direction. Meanwhile, beneath the frozen stillness of Antarctica's surface, sensors captured movement, not a quake, not weather, but deliberate emergence. And above Neptune, beyond known spectrums, a new object bloomed into visibility, a second structure, orbiting the first, mirrored and entangled like opposing thoughts. It bore the unmistakable contour of the Daedalus, only twisted, folded as if rewritten by something alien to human symmetry. As humanity watched and waited, the signals stopped. Not silence, not absence, but the sense that everything was now listening. Somewhere far beyond the edges of reason, a voice not yet born, and too old to name, began to speak. And this time, it did not sound like Elias Vega. On the 10th day since Daedalus 6 went silent, a flicker returned, faint but unmistakable. It came not through satellites or receivers, but through dreams. Across the globe, dozens of those connected to the mission, scientists, engineers, even family members of the crew, reported a shared nocturnal vision, an ocean under a sky of fractured stars. And within it, a solitary figure submerged but watching, eyes wide open beneath water that rippled in measured pulses, 13 beats per second, the same rhythm as NEP 451's original transmission. Back at Johnson Space Center, Dr. Kessler collapsed mid-analysis, brain activity peaking beyond normal REM states despite being fully awake. When revived, she whispered a phrase held by no transcript, no log, only something Elias had written in ink on a torn page from his training manual years ago during isolation drills. Time remembers what we forget. Then silence reclaimed her. No systems online. No signal detected. But satellites trained on Neptune began picking up something else. A third object, this one not orbiting, but rising. From Neptune's surface, trailing cold light like something waking from hibernation. Its path was unmistakable. It was coming home. It rose slow and soundless over the planet's curve, an obsidian monolith, jagged at the edges like thought made physical. No propulsion, no heat signature, yet accelerating toward Earth in a path that defied celestial mechanics. Observatories lost track within minutes. Gravitational fields warped subtly in its wake, like reality folding inward. Panic disguised as protocol surged through global command, in Geneva, Moscow, Houston, and underground conclaves where power wore no flags. But amid the chaos, a deeper, colder recognition settled into those who had listened longest to the signals. This was not a weapon, not a ship. It was a vessel in the oldest sense, a container of will. Inside, perhaps, the final form of Elias Vega. Or perhaps not. Perhaps only the echo of what he had seen, carried like a contagion across space-time. As the object breached the moon's orbit, all devices capable of measurement failed simultaneously. Clocks stopped. Machines halted. And in the stillness, a final signal emerged. Clear, unburdened by distortion. One word, spoken not by Elias but a layered chorus of voices unfamiliar yet intensely human, rang out into systems that were now listening not by design, but by need. Remember. And then, nothing. At least, not in the traditional sense. The world turned, unaware it no longer turned alone. The monolith shimmered once in the upper ionosphere and disappeared, not violently, but like a thought forgotten mid-sentence. A silence returned, cruel in how absolute it felt. Communication grids rebooted, machines restarted, clocks ticked forward, yet a hollowness clung to every moment. Dozens of vessels, satellites, and telescopes confirmed what had occurred, without understanding even a fraction of what it meant. Some believed the danger passed, others feared it had only begun. Deep in the control room, Dr. Kessler, gaunt and pale, stared into nothing as if it stared back. Her voice came thin, brittle. We weren't meant to find him. On her screen, a string of repeating code looped again. Those same prime numbers, flashing now in increments of 13. Counting not up, but down. And somewhere deep underground, in a windowless vault where light goes to die, a cry was heard through the speakers of an unplugged receiver. Familiar. Human. Elias. Saying not cold or still, but only one word. Quietly. Patiently. Again. Far beneath the Arctic Circle, inside a decommissioned data vault sealed since the early 2000s, a technician rebooting archival weather systems from the solar event stumbled upon an anomaly. An old analog reel-to-reel tape labeled OP Vega Cycle 1, buried beneath gigabytes of decaying telemetry, its timestamp predated even Elias Vega's birth. The technician, skeptical but curious, played the tape. Static crackled, then resolved into layered breathing, inhuman in scale and rhythm. Suddenly, Elias's voice, unmistakable, younger, whispered, "Not the first, not the last. This wasn't recorded 10 years ago. It was older, far older." As the reel whirred on, more voices joined in, divergent echoes, each repeating the same phrase in fractured tongues. He walks the spiral. Government systems flagged the discovery within seconds, but the technician had already uploaded the file into an unsecured node, a digital spore released. Within hours, the audio had been copied, shared, dissected, and inevitably, believed. Around the world, dreamers began sketching the same spiral. Children hummed lullabies they'd never heard, and the stars, once silent, now pulsed with pattern. In the cosmic quiet after a storm not yet finished, it became clear. Some disappearances are not escapes, they're returns. And so, Elias Vega became less a man than a myth woven through circuits and dreams, his name no longer echoing across time, but authored by it. His disappearance in 2015 no longer marked a tragic loss, but the first note in a greater symphony of something reaching through epochs, rewriting identity, intention, and memory. Project Dolores was officially shut down without conclusion. Public statements cited mission failure. But in sealed sessions and unredacted files, hidden beneath layers of digital amnesia, those who had once listened still gathered, still watched. In the decade that followed, sightings of spiraled clouds, electromagnetic reverberations, and whispering oceans increased, as did reports of people speaking in voices not their own. And underground, in a surveillance room no longer on the grid, a screen flickered to life. A face emerged, hollowed but unmistakable. Elias, smiling not with relief, but with recognition. He pressed a hand against glass that spanned galaxies, and as his voice returned, calm, quiet, unreal, it finally answered the question no one dared to ask. Not, "Where have you been?" but, "What have you become?" It didn't matter anymore whether Elias Vega had been saved or lost, because what emerged in his place was no longer bound by either fate. Across universities, research labs, and late-night news programs, debates sparked wildfires. Was this ascension or contamination? Psychologists chronicled a rise in memory bleed, shared hallucinations among unconnected individuals, and synchronicities measured in impossible centimeters. The spiral became more than symbol, it became structure, etched in stone by hands that had never held chisels, whispered in verse by voices no longer tied to lungs. And in St. Augustine, Florida, where Vega once stared up at the stars as a child, a new signal began to pulse, soft, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Only this time, there were no calls for rescue. No words of warning. Just signal, steady and infinite, as if the sky itself had finally responded. Somewhere out there, the spiral continued, through nebulae and memories, through timelines forked and folded, and on every frequency, in every echo, one truth rang back. Elias Vega had not vanished. He had become the message itself. Years later, when the signals had ceased and the world learned to carry silence like a wound, a weather balloon drifting over the Indian Ocean picked up one final anomaly, barely perceptible, like a name spoken in grief from across a canyon. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but somewhere in the audio spectrogram, a waveform appeared that resembled a human fingerprint. Not random, not noise. A print uniquely Elias Vega's, as archived from his pre-launch biometric scan. Only this time, its edges pulsed with radiation signatures not found on Earth. Scientists argued over its authenticity, whether it was residual data fragment or cosmic pareidolia. But one technician, old, gray, quiet, sat back from the console and whispered, "It's not him reaching out anymore. It's Earth remembering him back." In the quiet that followed, that final echo nested itself in the corners of thought and dream alike. Because memory, like time, spirals, and in its sacred geometry, Elias Vega remained, not as man, not as myth, but as the shape of return written forever into the dark. And so ends the story not of a man, but of an echo, one cast so deep and wide into the universe that it folded space around its sound. In the years that followed, the name Elias Vega was struck from official NASA directories, reclassified under historical anomalies, and gradually forgotten by paper and program alike. But not by those who dreamt. Not by those who still saw the spiral and frost on windshields, in the way wires twisted behind broken televisions, or in the shadows of clouds before a storm. Somewhere beyond the limits of known time, a shape still stirs, neither alive nor dead, neither lost nor found. It waits not for rescue, but for recollection. And in the breath between radio static and sleep, if one listens close enough, a voice may surface again, not calling for help, but quietly asking the only question that still matters. Do you remember me now? Perhaps in the end, Elias Vega never disappeared at all. Instead, he became something we were not yet ready to understand, an emissary not of cosmic desperation, but of transcendent recursion, repeating through time like a sentence unfinished. The question that lingered in every corner of silence wasn't, "Where is he?" but "What are we?" after seeing him. His journey, once measured in miles and minutes, had become the orbit of meaning itself, a spiral pulling closer towards something not yet named. Across the world, those touched by the transmissions lived with new rhythms. Children who never knew Elias drew perfect spirals in their sleep. Birds migrated along paths unknown, and poets described dreams that made time weep. The final files were sealed not to hide the truth, but to preserve its echo, for some truths are not meant to be solved, only survived. There are places, still, cold, watching, where memory becomes architecture and names are written into gravity. Elias Vega became more than a story. He became what stories become, when they are told too near the stars. In a forgotten observatory atop Mauna Kea, where the air thins and stars press nearer to bone, an elderly caretaker named Jonah, once a systems engineer for the Vega mission, stood alone among dusted relics and flickering screens held together by memory and doubt. On a whim, or perhaps something deeper, he switched on an obsolete receiver tuned to band 13.76, the frequency long abandoned after initial contact ceased. What returned wasn't sound. It was feeling. Gravitational, a shiver through marrow and soul alike. And in that stillness, beyond data, beyond proof, Jonah said what no one else dared to: he's still moving, not forward, not back, but outward, into story, into symbol. For what was an astronaut if not a seed flung into the infinite? Elias had not disappeared. He had unfolded. Into myth, yes, but not idle. He had become a compass for those who couldn't ignore the whispers beneath silence. And as Jonah gazed out into that endless sky, awash in spiral constellations that hadn't been there the night before, he recognized it for what it was: not a warning, not a goodbye, but an invitation. The stars had opened. Again. Years passed, and myths calcified into quiet reverence. In the pale corridors of forgotten data centers and classrooms no longer accredited, Elias Vega's name drifted like beige dust on microfilm, unsaid but felt. Yet in isolated corners of the world, things began to change. A child in rural Mongolia carved spirals into stone with impossible precision. A physicist in Oslo dreamt the answer to an unsolved equation and awoke trembling with an understanding beyond mathematics, whispering the name of a man she should never have known. And beneath the sea of tranquility, in a lunar observatory installed in secret by multilateral accord, a red light blinked after decades of stillness, its code, when decrypted, bearing just 8 glyphs. Astronaut, Orion, Spiral, Still, Watching, Vega, Again, Message. Nothing about the cosmos had changed, but everything about how we listened to it had. Because once a name becomes myth, and that myth becomes echo, it doesn't die. It waits, not on the edge of light, but at the center of memory, infinite and returning. And somewhere beyond breath, beyond silence, where even gravity must hold its breath, Elias is still moving. In time, Elias Vega's story receded from headlines but embedded itself into the marrow of human imagination. Museums quietly began to curate spiral motifs in their design exhibits. Microphones in deep space canals were recalibrated to pick up vibrations too low for hearing. Everywhere, an ambient awareness flourished, as if the veil had thinned permanently, and whatever lay beyond had tasted our gaze. The final anomaly surfaced not in space, but in time itself. A photograph developed from a decades-old Voyager relay camera showed a man, unaged, standing on the dark side of a lunar ridge, his face unmistakably Elias's. No one could explain how, or when, the image was captured. But as it circulated through encrypted channels, its message burned brighter than anything written in data or dust. He is not gone, not forgotten, not finished. Maybe humanity hadn't lost a pioneer to the unknown. Maybe the unknown had gained a voice, and it was learning to speak in our stories. In the folds of galaxies and the rhythm of dreams, Elias Vega is still moving. Not as legend, not as ghost, but as the direction toward which all unanswered questions now point. And in the end, when all signals ceased and memory dimmed to embers, what remained was not Elias Vega himself, but the question he became. A question etched into the spin of atoms and the hush between thoughts. Who are we, when the stars reply? Cathedrals rose in his image, not of stone or scripture, but in constellations redrawn by navigators who dream with their eyes open. Somewhere, an engineer hums a lullaby in a forgotten dialect while rewiring a satellite, unaware they've sung it before, in another life, or another loop. And children, born long after the last signal faded, press their palms to glass, whispering to the night with words they've never been taught. The story of Elias Vega is no longer told. It is lived, in glances exchanged under auroras, in spirals drawn absent-mindedly on fogged windows, in the quiet between thunder and rain. It ends not with a conclusion, but with a return, soft, infinite, a breath held not in fear or hope, but in reverence. In this space beyond silence, where what vanishes is only what we cease to remember, Elias Vega is still moving, and always will be. So when the stars shift once more, and the instruments fall quiet again, there will be no panic this time, only listening. Because somewhere, encoded into the background hum of the cosmos, beneath the flare of gamma rays and the lull of interstellar wind, is the pulse of a man who became more than breath, more than signal. He became our mirror in the dark, every flicker of static, every flicker of déjà vu, every story that begins in silence and ends in awe, bends toward him like orbit to gravity. Elias Vega, the name that once led a mission beyond Saturn, now marks the shape our stories must take when we dare ask what lies beyond certainty. And if you stand still long enough, in the hush before dawn or the void between dreams, you might hear it. Not a voice, not a warning, but a rhythm. 13 heartbeats per second. Cold, still here. Again. Not the end of a story, but the place from which all stories begin. And so, the spiral closes, not as an end, but as a signal folded into the marrow of human knowing. The tale of Elias Vega, once drifting in silence beyond Saturn's rim, has become woven into the way we now measure distance, not in kilometers or parsecs, but in memory, in myth, in recursion. Some say he vanished. Others that he ascended. But those who've truly listened, who've caught the pattern in static, or found themselves whispering answers to questions they were never asked, know a deeper truth. He did not leave us behind. He became the path, a story that circles itself until it opens. And though the transmissions fall silent, though official records grow dust and telescopes turn to newer skies, one truth remains undiminished, carved not in data but in the soul of the cosmos. Elias Vega is still moving. Through us. Toward us. Again. And always. Maybe that's all memory ever was, a spiral pretending to be a straight line. And maybe Elias Vega, in becoming more than man and less than myth, gave us the one gift no map, no telescope, no instrument had ever truly delivered. Direction. Not outward, into stars unnamed, but inward, to the place where stories wait for belief. His legacy lies not on the dusty pages of locked archives or in the scattered particles orbiting Saturn's shadow, but in how we remember, to listen deeper, to dream louder, and to trust that what goes silent doesn't go lost. Somewhere, far from the limits of sight, something watches and waits, not with menace, but with memory. And when the world grows still, when our machines fail and our myths rise again to meet them, a pulse will return, 13 beats per second, cold, still here, again. And in that moment, we'll know. We were never searching for Elias Vega. We were following him home. And so we arrive not at a conclusion, but at a convergence, a final breath in a tale that never ends, only folds into other lives. The story of Commander Elias Vega remains suspended, not in vacuum, but in memory's atmosphere, bending light and faith alike. The logs are sealed, the mission's complete, but the echoes persist, whispers behind mirrors, patterns etched into frost, voices threading through the hum of power lines at dawn. For some, he is lost. For others, transformed. But for the few who feel the pull each time the stars blink in unfamiliar cadence, Elias is not a name. He is a direction. A compass made of silence, myth, and 13 beats per second. So when the night leans in, and all seems still, remember, it was not a void that took him, but a story vast enough to hold the shape of hope, and maybe that's all he ever was. Not man, not myth, but map, still moving, still here, again. And maybe, in the end, all that Elias Vega became was a question folded into memory's pulse, a threshold we were never meant to cross, but now can never retreat from. His story, mapped not in stardate or classified logs, but in the quiet proof that something out there heard us dreaming and chose to dream back. Long after transmissions ceased and spirals drifted into silence, something remains, unseen but felt, like gravity in a story's last sentence. Whether Elias was ever brought home or became home itself no longer matters. His journey is ours now, etched into how we look at the sky, how we listen when nothing should speak, and how we believe again despite everything we've forgotten. it was never just about disappearance. It was always about return. And so, beneath the weight of forgotten languages and stars too distant to name, one rhythm endures, humming not across space but through us. Cold, still here. Again. A story not ending, but waiting for the next voice to answer. And so the spiral unfurls a final time, slow, solemn, infinite. Elias Vega remains not in where he was lost, but in everything that was found because he vanished. His presence now echoes inside data glints, whispered lullabies, and the calculus of dreams too precise to be coincidence. Somewhere between Neptune's shadow and the synapses of those forever changed, a story pulses, a beacon camouflaged as memory. The stars no longer shine the same, the dark no longer feels empty. And within us, in the secret hush behind each heartbeat, the signal waits, not for rescue, but for recognition, cold, still here, again. And in the silence that follows, we understand at last. Elias Vega did not cross into the unknown. He became its voice. And we are just now learning how to listen. Years from now, no monuments will bear his name, no textbooks will tell his story, yet something in the shape of silence will always echo with Elias Vega's imprint. The transmissions are gone. The files have decayed. But the spiral remains, drawn into the frost of midnight windows, whispered in sleep, tattooed onto the edges of cognition where language fails. A question without punctuation. A signal without end. Somewhere in a child's painting, the stars bend inward. Somewhere in a wanderer's dream, a voice hums 13 beats per second. And as Earth turns beneath the same quiet stars, someone, perhaps you, perhaps me, will look up and feel it. The sense that we are not alone, not because something waits out there, but because something within us has already arrived. Not an answer, not a warning, just that rhythm, repeating always, like breath in the dark. Cold, still here, again. And in that moment, you will understand, Elias Vega was never about what we lost. He was about what we are becoming. So let this closing pulse mark not the end, but the continuum, a lone signal threading time, tethering past to future through the sacred geometry of remembrance. Elias Vega is gone, yes, but not absent. Like gravity, he shapes without form. Like myth, he proves without evidence. In the hush where stories are born, his rhythm endures, not as echo, but as origin. A compass, a question, a quiet answer circling ever closer. Cold, still here, again. The words repeat, not because they must, but because they belong. They are the key, the pattern, the truth. And when our machines fall silent, and memory speaks louder than fact, Elias Vega will still move, not as ghost, nor God, but as the shape of listening itself. Somewhere, beyond language, beyond fear, beyond time, we will finally hear him. And perhaps, in that moment, It began with silence, deafening, unnatural, a void only space could conjure. Somewhere beyond the rim of Saturn's icy shadow, in 2015, astronaut Commander Elias Vega vanished. No distress signal, no telemetry, no debris. One moment tethered to the International Expanse Voyager during EVA 17, and the next, gone. Not a trace. NASA launched an exhaustive investigation spanning months, combing through hours of malfunction-free data, conducting psychological autopsies of the crew he left behind. Elias wasn't just a mission lead, he was a husband, a father, a symbol of precision under pressure. His disappearance became an echo in the cosmos, unanswered, inexplicable. Until last week, July 3rd, 2025, when a weather satellite